Hello there, and welcome to episode 7 of the Or So She Says podcast. My name is Narissa Shea, and I am a personal trainer, nutritionist, sport and exercise psychology consultant, yoga instructor, and a professional Irish dancer. I am so excited for today's episode. Today, I am going to be chatting with Michelle Hone. She's the founder and manager of the Fit Clinic. So the Fit Clinic is an online nutrition coaching company made up of 10 qualified nutritionists and nutritional therapists who are dedicated to designing tailor-made plans for the needs and goals of all their clients. They specialize predominantly in female health, and they empower women to be the best versions of themselves using evidence-based practice and simple changes. They specialize in a vast array of areas such as body composition, performance nutrition, female hormone related issues, fertility, and pregnancy. I've been following Michelle for years, and her ebook, Your Bible for Hacking Your Hormones, honestly changed my life. And it actually started me on my own personal journey of working with my body and not against it. I can't quite put into words how grateful I am to have someone like this come on to the show. So I really hope you enjoy listening to this episode as much as I enjoyed recording it. And I really hope you get a lot from this episode. And remember, if you like this episode and found it helpful, please feel free to share it with your friends, with your family, share it on social media, maybe give it an old like, subscribe, and a rating. It goes a really long way in helping small content creators like myself spread a very important message. So without further ado, here we go. Episode 7 of the Or So She Says podcast with the incredible Michelle Hone. So Michelle, hello. Thank you so much for coming on to the podcast today. I am absolutely buzzing to have you on. I have been following you for years, and literally you were the reason why I embarked on this journey of like working with my body and not against it. And like I remember downloading your ebook, Your Bible to Hacking Your Hormones, and it changed my life. I literally, like, my eyes were opened. I was like, oh my God, I'm not a little man and I don't have to go around like a little man. So literally, I can't thank you enough for that. So
Oh, that's amazing. Thank you so much.
do you want to, for anyone who doesn't know you, give yourself a little bit of an introduction and maybe what you do and who you work with?
Yeah, so my name is Dr. Michelle Hone. I am a female health nutritionist. I'm the founder of a company called the Fit Clinic. I set it up, God, I think is it coming on 8 years now in July. And the Fit Clinic is basically an online nutrition consultancy. We have a team of nutritionists and nutritional therapists who specialize in female health. So anything from PCOS, hypothalamic amenorrhea, preconception, fertility, pregnancy. Basically, if you have a vagina, we're happy to work with you. Like even right through to perimenopause and menopause. So that's the work that we do, and just really passionate about breaking down taboos and stigmas around menstrual health and menopause and fertility and pregnancy loss. So yeah, I absolutely love the work that I do.
I send all my clients immediately to go and follow you on Instagram because I kind of work with like women between the ages of about 25 to 40. So I mean, some of them, it's like actually making them realize about contraception, that it's not a period. With others, it's they're trying to conceive, and with others, it's maybe perimenopause, things like that. And I'm always like, just please follow this girl's page. Like, you have no idea how much you're going to learn by just following her. So I suppose
Thank
I
you.
I actually don't even know where to start, but I suppose we'll start with periods. Like, you always say that you view it as like your fifth vital sign, and I absolutely adore how you describe this. So do you want to talk a little bit about periods, different
Yeah.
stages of the
So
cycle?
when we talk about it as our fifth vital sign, for so many years or up until now, we've kind of seen our period as something that's a hindrance and a nuisance and something that gets in the way. And a lot of people, when they have an irregular cycle or they skip a period or they don't have a period at all, they're like, oh, great, this is grand. This hindrance is gone. When really it's so important. It's our fifth vital sign. So what I mean by that is we have our other four vital signs. So our temperature, our breathing rate, our blood pressure, and other ones. So they're like, the analogy that I always use is if you woke up in the morning and your blood pressure was through the roof, or it was really low and you felt quite weak, or you fainted, or your temperature was through the roof, you would be like, okay, there's something wrong. I'm not well. Let me go to the emergency room or go to the doctor. Whereas when we have a regular period or a missed period, we're like, oh yeah, it's just, I skipped a period this month, or my period's really heavy this month, or it was way lighter than it usually is. And the way I always describe it is like your menstrual cycle or your period, and the health of your period, how regular it is like your body's way of communicating with you. And it's basically, if your period is off, or if it's really heavy, like heavier than usual, if it doesn't arrive at all that month, it's your body's way of like being like, hey, like red flag over here, like something is up. And there's always a reason as to why you've skipped a period, or it's much longer. And normally if you look back over the month or the previous months that you've had, you'll usually be able to join the dots. It's something, usually like 95% of the time, it's nutrition related, it's something to do with your stress levels, it's something to do with exercise, it's to do with rapid weight loss. And then we start to look at things like hypothalamic amenorrhea and PCOS. So there's always an underlying reason. It is never, ever normal to just not get a period, or to consistently get a period every 28 days and then out of nowhere it's 40 or 50 days. Like, that's not normal. It's not the worst thing in the world, like, not to scare people, but it's literally a little alarm bell from your body to say that something is up and that you need to further investigate.
So what would be like a regular, like within what time frame would you say would be regular?
So the textbook period is every 28 days, but the
Yeah.
research actually shows that it's closer to 29 days.
Okay.
So, but everyone's going to vary, and people always freak out. They're like, I got my period on 28 days this month, and then 26 the last, and now it's 30. Is that an irregular cycle? No, it's not. So my kind of ballpark, especially when it comes to fertility clients, I like to see them anywhere from 26 to 35 days. So if your period is like, at one stage it's 26 and then the next month it's 30, that's fine. I would still class that as a regular cycle. But when it starts to drop below like kind of 24, 23 days, that's an issue. And when it starts to push above 35 days, that's an issue as well.
Okay, so it's kind of within them time frames if it varies a little bit. Yeah. Okay, because I think that's really important, because something my clients would say to me is they're like, oh, well, last month it was this. And when they start tracking their cycle and they get really into it, they start worrying. Then they're like, is that irregular? And I was like, I'm not an expert in it, but I was like, usually I have that Flow app and I love it because it just tells you all the little things, and it gives you like the little time frame that they're like, oh, this is regular or not. But I think one of the biggest game changers for me, and I try to get my clients to do it as soon as they sign up, I'm like, do you track your period? Mm-hmm. And I know, and people will be like, I know, but I know roughly. And I was like, no, but not just your period, like the symptoms that go along with it. When I first started tracking, I was actually using Natural Cycles. I was doing my basal temperature and everything, and it was the most amazing thing. It was the most eye-opening thing I've ever done. But like, to actually look into the different phases of the menstrual cycle and become more in tune with what's happening at different times of the month.
It's so interesting, isn't it? It's something like so empowering and just amazing about understanding, okay, this is my change in cervical mucus. I must be ovulating around now. Okay, I'm literally stripping off from the bed. I must have just ovulated. My sense of smell is through the roof. I'm attracted to people that I wouldn't normally be attracted to.
Yeah.
Be ovulating. It's so interesting when you actually start. I'm starving. Why am I so hungry? It's because my metabolism is after increasing towards the end of my cycle. And when you start to become more in tune with it, it's actually, you just kind of feel more at one with yourself. You kind of feel like your mind and your body is just communicating with each other, and you just feel so much more at peace in a way. I don't know, I can't really describe it, but there's something really special about it.
I totally agree, because I think, like, I always say to my clients as well, like I've been working with some clients for like 2 years, like they're just part of the crew now. It's just genuinely like a little family. But we nearly know at certain times of the month, they'd be like, just morning, Narissa, it's day 23 of my cycle, and we always know I'm a bit wobbly around this time. And I'm always like, but I'm like, it's not that the knowledge of this is going to completely alleviate it, but you can approach yourself in a much more self-compassionate way if you understand why this is happening. And I think that was a big thing for me, was I always like to know why things are happening. And as soon as I was like, oh, that makes sense, it doesn't get rid of it, but I'm a lot more compassionate to myself when I know why it's happening, which kind of segues on kind of perfectly. I know this is a whole topic in itself, and I actually heard you talking about this at Festival Manon. I know, to summarize it, it's a lot, but just briefly, if you want to talk about like the luteal phase, the follicular phase, like the main kind of things that are happening at those points of the cycle.
Yeah. So if we take like the textbook 28-day cycle, I know that most people won't have that 28-day cycle, but just for the purpose of this explanation. So in an ideal world, you'll generally ovulate halfway through your cycle. So in and around day 14, but again, research shows that most people ovulate on day 15. So day 14, we'll say, is when we ovulate. So anything before day 14, so day 1 to day 14 is classed as your follicular phase, and anything from day 15 to when you get your next period, which is day 28 or 29, would be your luteal phase. So there's two main hormones that are dominant in each of these phases. So we'll start with the follicular phase. So our follicular phase is within that phase, you're going to be, it's estrogen that's going to be the dominant hormone. So estrogen, the way I always describe this is like, estrogen is like your fun best friend who wants to like take you on a night out and like get the ride with you. So it's basically, we feel really energized, we feel creative, we're really good in social settings, we're able to articulate what we want to say. Like I remember like there's been times where I've done podcasts and podcasts and presentations where I've been like day 27 and I actually just can't, I'm like, the words aren't coming to me here. Like, whereas when you're ovulating, like, yeah, I'll definitely do that huge podcast 100%, but it never goes like that. So you're more creative, you're better at public speaking, you're just able to communicate better, you feel better, and basically your body is trying to put you out into society to have sex to get pregnant, basically. And obviously the most important part is your sex drive is higher in your follicular phase, especially as you start to approach ovulation. So that's your follicular phase. Like in terms of training as well, obviously this would be important for people who are listening and your followers, is that follicular phase is a time where we generally feel really, really good. And it's a good time to like push. It's a good time to place a heavy emphasis on more heavy resistance training, more strength-based resistance training. We metabolize carbohydrates better, our recovery is better, our insulin sensitivity is higher. So it's a really good time to push on with training and make sure you're getting in sufficient carbohydrates for your post-workout recovery. And again, like as I say this, like this is the kind of rule of thumb. Like this doesn't mean that you're going to feel unbelievable from day 5 to day 14. And it doesn't mean that you're not going to hit a PB on day 26, but this is kind of the general rule. So then if you compare that to the follicular phase, so in our follicular phase, our hormone progesterone is predominant. So progesterone is it's like a natural Xanax. It's a real kind of chilled out hormone. Like if you think about it, it's the predominant hormone during pregnancy, and anyone who's gone through pregnancy, you'll know that for the most part, you kind of just feel quite zen. You feel quite chilled out, apart from like obviously the mad mood swings. So during your luteal phase, it's kind of a time when you go inwards a little bit. You maybe don't want to socialize. Like I always describe it as like progesterone or your luteal phase is like, or progesterone is like your friend who wants like Netflix and chill and just chill out and not really do much. So this is just kind of like a really important time to understand this and to know that maybe you're not going to feel like pushing it in the gym. Maybe you're not going to feel like you're on top of your recovery. Your appetite is going to be increasing. Your insulin sensitivity is actually down, which means that your blood sugars end up a bit more dysregulated than they would be in your follicular phase. And when our blood sugars are dysregulated, that means that we get cravings. So if you add in an increase in our metabolism, therefore an increase in hunger on top of an increase in cravings, then of course, if you're trying to stick to a calorie deficit, it's going to be quite difficult in that luteal phase. So it's really important to understand this so that you can be compassionate with yourself. Because if you didn't know this, you'd be like, okay, I'm day 26. I feel like shit. I don't want to get out of bed. I'm really lethargic. I don't want to talk to anybody. Everyone's annoying me. I really don't want to train. I'm starving. I just want sugar. I just want caffeine. And I feel bloated. Like if you didn't know that you're supposed to kind of feel a little bit like this to a certain extent on day 26, then it's really difficult to be compassionate with yourself, because you're like, why am I so demotivated? Why do I just want to eat everything around me when I'm trying to be really, I suppose, really improve on my behaviors and improve my nutrition lifestyle? And it's the last thing I want to do. So I suppose honoring those cravings, honoring that hunger, honoring that you don't want to maybe go and do your HIIT session today and just going for a walk, throwing in a podcast, going for a swim. Do you know what I mean? Just being a bit more gentle with yourself and being compassionate with understanding why you're feeling like that in that phase.
Yeah. And I think that like it has literally, and I think I'm so passionate about it because it changed my life so much that I'm
Mhm.
like trying to instill all this to my clients. So like I literally was talking to a client earlier and I have a call with her later and she outright said to me, I'm just warning you around that 23-day mark. I just need to be talked a little bit off the rails today. She's like, I
100%.
know I'm going to be fine next week. She's like, I know I
Yeah.
am. But she didn't know that months ago. And I was like, you know, the awareness that you have that now is incredible. Like, it's incredible. As I said, it doesn't get rid of it, but it allows you to be a bit more compassionate. But that actually kind of brings me on to like a good conversation here is like with PMS and PMDD. Now, I know the two are different, and I know kind of dealing with PMS is one thing, and we can all have maybe some symptoms, but where does it become PMDD territory, like, and what's kind of the difference? Because I do have a couple of clients that really, really suffer around this time of month, and they are like nearly debilitated with it. And we have discussed it before, and they're going to go and get their bloods done and stuff, but they wanted me to ask you anyway. So I was like, oh,
Yeah. So it's really, really tough PMDD. So basically what it is, it's like a really severe version of PMS. So normal PMS, I think we shun away PMS and we're like, oh, it's not normal. You're supposed to feel great 28 days of the month. But that's not true. You're always going to have, because you're getting like fluctuations and dips in hormones, you're going to feel worse at certain times of the month, and that's fine. So of course you're going to have like, or a lot of people anyway would have a little bit of cramping, a little bit of like low mood. Some people suffer with anxiety as that progesterone and that estrogen really drops towards the end of your cycle, where like that's fine. The issue is when it becomes really debilitating, when you feel literally depressed for several days of the month, where you feel like I've had clients before where they're having panic attacks, where they're just so anxious that they can't even function throughout the day. And this is where it starts to become what we call PMDD. And that's the difference between PMS and PMDD, where it becomes a case where you can't function with these feelings of anxiety and depression and low mood. Like it's not just low mood. It's like there's people who would have PMDD who would also have suicidal intentions.
yeah.
So it's really, really important, if you know that you have that, to seek help.
Yeah. And what would you recommend? They go and get a blood test, or they need to, is there a particular blood test you go for, or?
So with PMS and with PMDD in general, nothing's really going to show up in a blood test. Like it might be
Okay.
a case, 100% I'd recommend getting your vitamin D tested and your other nutrient status, like your iron and your B12 and your folate. But for the most part, like it could be a case that they're low in progesterone, but will that be picked up by a blood test? Probably not necessarily, because our progesterone is all relative to each other. So for me, when I'm at peak, for example, peak progesterone, which is around day 21, my PMS or my progesterone will only ever reach about 30. That's just the norm for me. Whereas 30 to somebody else might be really, really low and they might feel awful. Whereas I feel okay at 30. And someone who's normally like their range is supposed to be kind of 40 to 45. If they drop to a 30, then they're going to feel really, really crap. So there's no way, unless you're comparing it to something like prior to when you had PMDD, you're not going to get like a true reading, if that makes sense. You're just going to get a number. It like, yes, if it's below 30, you definitely have low progesterone, but there's no real one blood test for PMDD. And it's really just like, again, like I kind of hate using the term holistic, but it's really just like a 360 approach. It's nutrition, it's supplementation, it's exercise, it's managing your mental health, it's sleep, it's stressors, it's your relationship, it's where you're spending your energy, who you're surrounding yourself with. Daylight exposure is going to be a huge one. So there's no real one silver bullet when it comes to PMDD. It kind of needs to be treated on a case per case basis and needs a really all round approach.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that I'm really aware of as well is obviously like a lot of my clients would be fat loss clients. Like, so, you know, I remember listening to your podcast and talking about, you know, calorie deficits, and obviously the main thing that people tend to drop out, and I always try to tell my clients, I'm like, just because we're going for a slight calorie deficit, like don't slash all the fats. I was like fat is really important for hormone regulation. And I think a lot of the time, like you were saying, the 360 view, I know myself from when I've put myself in a calorie deficit before, and I noticed my PMS got worse, and it was a lot worse. And I took a look at it, and you know, I took the step back and coached myself and was like, what was the first thing you cut out there? you were cutting out the fats. And I noticed a huge difference then when I went back up to maintenance, increased like the mono and polyunsaturated fats. All of a sudden the next month my PMS wasn't as bad. So I was like, but like only I like was following you, went to do my nutrition. Like I wouldn't have never known this. I would have
No.
just been completely like, why do I feel awful this month? Like, and this is the thing where people are just like, oh, it's just a calorie deficit. It's just a calorie deficit. And I was like, it's absolutely not. Like, especially, and I don't like to compare. Like, I do coach men, but I mainly very very little. Like I predominantly work with women, and I'm just like, there is just so many factors we need to consider here. I was like, and you can't just do it's a calorie deficit, stick to it 30 days of the month, train consistent. I'm like, I kind of ease them into it in their first few weeks of working, and I drip feed them the stuff. And then after a few weeks, I'm like, okay, now I'm going to just give you all of this information.
Yeah.
And they're like, whoa, like this is amazing. I never knew any of this. And
Yeah.
it's crazy. Like it's amazing to see so many people get really, really interested in like working with their bodies then. So it's good. But
But what I was going to say was like, and you just touched on it there. The reason we're like, oh, it's just a calorie deficit is because all of the research that we have around calorie deficits is done on men. And we're not like just kind of shrunk down versions of men. We're so much more complex. And it's really important that we understand that our physiology is we're nearly like separate species
yeah.
in terms of our physiology, especially when it comes to how we respond to nutrition and exercise and stress. So it's so important that we kind of get rid of this mentality of like, oh yeah, just slash your calories and do HIIT training like 5 times a week. And like, yeah, you might lose weight, but your health is going to be completely off. And I think we're kind of changing the narrative around health being synonymous with being just slim and being lighter. Like some of the most unhealthy people that I've ever worked with have been the leanest. And it's really important to understand that. So just because you're lean by no means does it mean that you're healthy and that your hormones are optimized and that your fertility, like you're in an optimal place for fertility as well. So that's just important to bear in mind as well.
Absolutely. And I think like, well, I think I always say to my clients when they start working with me, they obviously we've all been bombarded with diet culture. They come and they say, I want to lose weight. And I'm like, but why? But why? But why? But why? But why? Like 5 times until we get to it. And then we like at the forefront of all my coaching, I'm like, it's health and can we focus on intrinsic motivators? Like, and they start saying, I'm feeling great, I'm more confident, you know, like I slept with my partner with the lights on and stuff like this. And it's amazing things like that. And I'm like, if we can focus on all the feel good factors, I'm like, look, if weight loss is the goal, which it completely can be, I was like, but not having that at the forefront of it is so so important. And I think that narrative is changing a bit now, which is amazing. And I think like health has to be at the forefront, even if
Yeah.
people's like as you said, like I know people who are extremely lean, and by no means would I say they are healthy at all, like, and they definitely don't have a period. And then like you start seeing like binge eating and things like that coming in. And I just think more people are talking about it now, which is great, and people are talking about their own experiences with it and stuff like that. But I think looking at someone and looking at them and thinking they're lean and thinking that they're in great shape and they're really really healthy, that we do need to step away from that.
Like the issue arises when someone wants to lose weight because they're trying to fill a void in their life. It's like, well, why do you actually want to lose weight? Is it that you just, I just want to, and I'm guilty of, not that I'm guilty of, I just want to be guilty about it. I'm like, sometimes I feel a little bit fluffy and I want to feel a little bit better in my shorts during the summer, and that's fine. But I already have a sense of worthiness, like because I've worked on this. Whereas years ago, I was slashing my calories to get skinny because I was trying to fill a void of like unworthiness. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Sure,
yeah,
you know this from working with clients that their goal is weight loss. So there's nothing wrong with wanting to lose weight if your reason for it isn't, I will be happy and feel worthy when I'm this much lighter. And
yeah.
that's where, because ultimately when you are that much lighter, like I know myself because I've been there, you don't feel any more worthy. So it's really important to understand that weight loss goal isn't always as simple as a weight loss goal. It isn't always a surface level. Sometimes it goes a little bit deeper than that.
Yeah, it's the I'll be happy when trap. I'm like, there, no, but anything you have to ask, why do you think you will? Now, like, I think when clients work with me for a while, like in their check-ins and stuff, I ask them their values. We go through their values. We keep going through this, and a lot of the time when they dig deep, it comes back down to they're like, do you know, I actually just want to have more energy to play with my kids, and I actually just want to be a good role model for my kids and eat a bit better. And so, and there I'm like, there, that's
Yeah.
a why. That's a really good why. Let's stick with this why. And I think the more, like, I've been the same. I worked as a professional dancer for 10 years. So when I tell you, before I got into personal training and nutrition and everything, like, awful, like terrible diet, like just starving ourselves coming up to rehearsals. You're doing cardio for like 8 hours a day at rehearsals, like you'd be injured. And I actually work with a lot of dancers now, and it's crazy to think like the the amount that we could have all done with years ago to just have someone come into us and talk about nutrition. And it's why I'm so passionate about talking about it now, because I was like, I could have saved myself so much heartbreak over them years, and like been a lot stronger and in a lot better position to actually be able to do tours instead of just starving yourself coming up to tours thinking you have to be like, and miserable, and actually having such a distorted body image. Because I
Yeah.
look back at photos now and I looked like stick thin, but I was like, I could not see that at all. I was just comparing myself to this, and this. And now I'm like, I just like feeling strong and love
Yeah.
food. It's like,
And like very often, if you look back on like if you were to choose the photos where you're the happiest, you're probably at like your kind of comfortable set point. It's rarely when you look really, really slim or
yeah,
like really lean. I think the leanest I ever was like the most unhappy I ever was. So
yeah. And
yeah.
I had, last year had like a very very stressful year. Like my dad passed away and stuff last year, so it was a lot last year. And I think like what happened was, like, without even realizing it, things just kind of spiraled and hit me around Christmas time like a ton of bricks, and I dropped down to like under 50 kilos. And I actually just couldn't, and I love food, love training and everything, and I wasn't even training that much. It was just stress, like. And I remember someone commenting on a photo I had up, and if it was me years ago, I would have got such a buzz out of them thinking, God, you look great. And I actually looked at the photo and I was like, this is when I kind of came out the other side of it and realized and started getting back to feeling myself and eating properly. I looked at the photo and I was like, I don't look good there. But that narrative is still playing in people's heads. They saw me looking the leanest I've been. I was like, do you want? And I put up a post about it because I actually was just like, I actually want to talk about this. Someone commented saying that I looked really, really well at this point. Do you know why I dropped down to that weight? Listed out all the things that happened, and people were like, thank you for opening up about that and realizing to stop glorifying weight loss at any cost. Like, I was like,
Yeah,
because
that's
that
amazing
was,
that you can do that. Yeah, absolutely.
but it's the vulnerability as well. And I think like the more we can just put ourselves out there and talk about these things, I was like, it just normalizes being able to talk about it and not having that narrative that, oh, thinner is better. So compliment anyone if they lose a little bit of weight. Like, you don't know what they're going through behind the scenes.
Yeah, no, that's so true. So right.
I'm going to completely segue and come back to something which we're back kind of talking about periods, is two things I'd love to talk about, because I have a couple of clients that actually have been diagnosed with endometriosis, PCOS, and I have a couple of clients who, well, they want to go and get tested. They're not entirely sure, but like they've been kind of researching it a little bit. And could you talk a little bit about like the main symptoms of
Mhm.
endometriosis and PCOS?
So I'll start with PCOS. So PCOS, the main symptoms would be excess facial hair, cystic acne, especially around your jawline, really poor energy levels, a difficulty losing weight. And then in terms of diagnosing it, it's important that you detect that there are excess androgens in your blood test. There may be cysts on your ovaries, they may not be. It doesn't mean like, so it's kind of confusing. Just because you have cysts on your ovaries on an ultrasound doesn't definitively mean that you have PCOS. And then on the flip side, you don't need to have cysts on your ovaries in order to be diagnosed with PCOS. So it's important, even though the name is polycystic ovarian syndrome, doesn't mean that if you have cysts in your ovaries, you definitively have PCOS. So, and the other main one would be what can happen is menstrual dysregularity. So an absent menstrual cycle, or a menstrual cycle that tends to be longer than 35 days. So they would kind of be some of the hallmark symptoms. The issue with PCOS is really 80% of people anyway, when it comes to PCOS, they have what's called like poor insulin sensitivity. So like a version of insulin resistance. So basically the easiest way to describe this is like insulin is a hormone that takes glucose takes sugar from your blood and transports it into your muscle cells. So it's like a key that comes along and opens up the muscle or opens up the tissue and allows that glucose to flow in. The issue arises with PCOS is when you have high insulin resistance. That means that your body kind of becomes less receptive to the effect of that key trying to get into that door. So basically what happens is you get this big buildup in blood sugars, and then you also get your pancreas pushing out more insulin. So you have high blood sugars, and you also have high insulin in PCOS for the most part anyway, as I said, 80%. And what can happen when you have elevated insulin is you get an elevation in our male hormones, also known as our androgens. And our androgens are going to basically interfere with the workings of a reproductive system. We're supposed to have androgens, that's fine, but we're not supposed to have elevated androgens. So they can disturb ovulation. They can have an interaction with their ovaries and stop or delay ovulation. And that's why one of the hallmark symptoms would be your menstrual dysregularities. So one of, I suppose, and as well, sorry, when you have blood sugar dysregulation, that's when you have really poor energy levels, you have really bad mood swings, you're hungry all of the time, you're finding it difficult to lose weight because you're exhausted, you don't want to go to the gym, you definitely don't want to train, you don't want to go for a walk, and all you want to do is eat because you're, yourself, when you're really tired, you just want to reach for something sugary. So it makes it really difficult to lose weight. So one of the really kind of core treatment plans that we use, or I wouldn't even call them treatment plans, but kind of methods of managing when it comes to PCOS, is starting with nutrition and starting to really try and optimize our insulin sensitivity and balance out our blood sugar. So making sure you're looking at your meals and thinking, okay, are they balanced? Is it just carbohydrates, or am I adding in fats and protein? So like a balanced meal should include definitely your protein, your fats, and some carbohydrates. So it's important that if you think about it, the easiest way, there's two ways of managing our blood sugar. So the first one is by looking at the carbohydrate sources that we choose. So going for and choosing those slow releasing, more complex carbohydrates like our oats, our rice, our whole grain bread, our veg, or fruit, things like that, versus our more kind of processed carbohydrates. That's the first way of managing our blood sugars. And the second way of managing our blood sugars is, okay, how are we building our meals? So when you pair a protein or a fat with a carbohydrate food, all of a sudden you kind of blunt the blood sugar response that you get from that meal. So there are two really important kind of hacks for PCOS, is trying to balance your blood sugars. And then, like, in terms of supplementation, there's some really, really effective supplements that can help improve our insulin sensitivity. It's a really good supplement called myo-inositol. The other one is magnesium. Zinc can also bring down our androgens. So they would kind of be the core ones that we would look at. Again, like, it obviously depends on the person, but they would be the ones that most people tend to do really well on. And then in terms of, again, treating their insulin resistance, and it's important that we're, like, if you think about it, we're getting to the root of the problem if we treat our insulin resistance. Sometimes people think like, oh, well, if I just take this supplement, or if I eat loads of broccoli to decrease my androgens, then my PCOS will go away. But my argument is like, but you're not actually getting to the root of the problem. The root of the problem is the insulin resistance. It's not actually the elevated androgens. So the other thing that's obviously so important is exercise. So the way I always describe it is, when it comes to exercise, basically, especially resistance training, it's like making your muscle like a sponge to glucose. So if you're increasing your muscle, you're essentially increasing your muscle tissue when you do resistance training repetitively, and like in terms of when you use like a program that has progressive overload. And also, when you do resistance training, your muscles become like hungry for sugar. So it really like increases that insulin sensitivity for up to 48 hours after that training session. So I would nearly go as far as saying that exercise is more important than nutrition, which is a crazy thing for a nutritionist to say.
Oh, okay.
When it comes to PCOS, because you can, the most effective changes that I've gotten with PCOS with clients is the ones that do like proper resistance training and are really, really consistent with it. That's really, really important.
Yeah. And I know, and I understand that it can be really hard, because my clients who do have PCOS, like, you're coming from a place of like lower energy levels. So actually getting the ball rolling, it's like, where do I start? Do I start with the nutrition? Do I start with this? And knowing that everything is ultimately going to help it, but it's just, it can be a very, very tough place. But like I always say to them, like, okay, well, let's break this down. And I was like, okay, like, can we go from doing no training sessions to one training sessions and then just build it from there? And then when they start seeing the benefits of what they're doing, then they understand that it is working. But even them, just like, as soon as they find out, I had a client with PCOS, and she, as soon as she found out, it's not that she wanted to know she had it, but it's nearly like she knew she had it. And she was like, as soon as I got diagnosed with that, I actually was able to be like, okay, well, now at least I can take some action on it. What can I do here, like nutrition wise, things like that. So I think that's really empowering as well, is for people to know how common it is as well.
Yeah, the stats are about 1 in 10 for PCOS. So it's important to know the stats and to like know if you're feeling off, if your menstrual cycle is dysregular, especially if it's longer than 35 days, if you're getting that. And it's not just when I talk about facial hair, everyone's like, oh my God, I have facial hair. I'm like, everyone has facial hair. Like everyone has that fluff, but this is quite different. Like it's dark. It's really unwanted hair. And also your cystic acne around your jawline tends to be the hallmark symptoms of excess androgens. But I would always try and look for, a androgen test, like to pop into your GP, get your bloods done, get your testosterone done, get your DHEAS tested. And also another one is your sex hormone binding globulin as well, to have that tested and make sure that's in range. And if it's not, that would be suggestive of PCOS.
Okay, I got your new book about the blood tests, and it's amazing.
Oh yeah. Oh, that's good. Oh,
So
that's
this is a plug right here, that if anyone wants to get these blood tests, like you have a new book out that goes through everything, and a lot of it is to do with actually like fertility tests and stuff as well, isn't it?
Yeah. So like the reason it took me ages to write that book, but I just felt like I was getting so many messages being like, what do I do? Like what blood tests do I get done? What are the ranges that I'm looking for? Because a lot of the time, like I've had so many clients who have come to me and they might not be getting pregnant, or maybe they've suffered a pregnancy loss, or they might not have a period, and they're normally told like one of two things. Oh, you're only 30, like you've loads of time to have a baby. I'm like, but I've been trying for a year. Like there's clearly something amiss here. But it's like, oh, fine, you've loads of time. And actually, when you think about it, it's mad. So when you're 30, like not to scare people, but like you're coming towards the end of your fertility. Like obviously it's fine. Like most of us, like I think as far as I know, the stats in Ireland is most of us are having our first baby at 33, which is absolutely fine. But if you think about it, if you're getting your period at like 14 or 15, when you're 30, 31, 32, you are approaching the end of it. And like, by all means, I've had clients I've had a few clients who've actually had a baby at 43. So like, obviously it's not to panic people, but for a GP to turn around and say, oh, it's fine, like you're only 30, like just keep trying. It's like, well, I need further investigation here. And like, I want to be pregnant yesterday, not in X amount of months time, when you're just kind of kicking the can down the road. Like they're normally when someone has been trying to conceive for a year, there is something amiss there. So yeah, that was one of the things that a GP would come back with. And the other would be if someone went to them with hypothalamic amenorrhea, so that's the loss of your period for more than 3 months, or if they went with kind of just menstrual disturbances, so their period is really irregular, or they're bleeding between cycles or anything like that, they were just recommended being put on the pill. It's like, well, but what's the issue? What's the actual underlying issue? Like if you put someone on the pill, you're literally just putting a plaster over what the actual root issue is. And I think the reason I'm really passionate about that is because most of the clients coming to us are trying to get pregnant. A lot of them are trying to get pregnant, and they were just put on the pill X amount of years ago, and they were told like, oh, just go on the pill. And when they come off the pill, they've got all of this unraveling to do because they've just kicked the can down the road to deal with this underlying issue at a later date. And that later date is when they wanted to be pregnant yesterday. And I have to tell them, okay, well, you actually haven't had your own period in 15 years. So we have to figure out, one, like, first of all, where it is, why it's not here, and what is the underlying reason as to why it hasn't come back. So trying to kind of tell that to someone who is already stressed that they're not getting pregnant is really, really difficult. So I just think a lot of things could have been avoided if a GP did the correct blood tests, figured out, okay, this is HA, figured out maybe this is PCOS, figured out from a sperm analysis that it's male partner infertility, then we just would have people leaving. I think the issue is that I see so many people leaving GP practices feeling so disempowered, feeling so dismissed, really disheartened, sometimes like feeling like they've been gaslighted, and like that their symptoms aren't even real, and that they're kind of over exaggerating things, or they're overthinking things, or they're a bit crazy. Obviously, I'm sure GPs wouldn't say that to someone, but that's the kind of feeling that they're getting. And yeah, I'm just really passionate about women just becoming more empowered about their own health, how their bodies work, and really knowing what they need to know to become optimally healthy.
Yeah, and I think like you're totally right what you said there about just putting people on the pill. Like I've had clients who've come, they've been on contraception for years, and they were like, "Oh, I just went with really bad acne, and then I got put in the pill. I just never came off it." And I think it is kicking the can down the road, because it's not until you get older. And it's the same with like HA. They think, "Oh, I don't have a period. Like for now, it's fine. This is handy." And I'm like, "Yeah, but like." You might not want a child now, but like down the line, this is all things. It's like when I say to people, okay, you might think that you're training now. You're also training for the 70-year-old you who wants to be able to be mobile, to get around, to look after themselves, which kind of, I was listening to a podcast you did recently, actually, and I have to write this down, because I was like, I genuinely was like, what did you say exactly? You were talking about the TSH test when people were trying to conceive, and that the blood test will come back and the doctor will be like, oh, that's normal, but actually if you're trying to conceive, it needs to be under a different range or something.
Yeah,
This blew my mind. I was like, what?
Yeah. So without trying, I always find it really difficult to explain this without overcomplicating it. So we have our thyroid is really, really important for our menstrual health, but also our reproduction. It's really important that we have an optimally healthy thyroid going into early pregnancy, because the baby basically relies on our own thyroid hormone, because they don't have their own thyroid gland for the first 20 weeks. So if we can just about make enough for ourselves, we probably can't make enough for them. So when it comes to thyroid health, we have a hormone called thyroid stimulating hormone, TSH. And when TSH is high, that means, or like high out of range, that means that our thyroid is struggling to function. So if you imagine thyroid stimulating hormone, if that's high, our body is trying to stimulate our thyroid and send more and more TSH out. On the flip side, if our TSH is low, it means that our thyroid is probably functioning too well and too quickly. And that's when you kind of reach what's called hyperthyroidism. And the way I always remember this is hyper means like high, and hypo rhymes with low. So hyperthyroidism is high thyroid function. Hypothyroidism is low thyroid function. So when it comes to normal Joe Soap going in, getting their thyroid done, if your TSH is under 4.2, you have no issues. You're within range, okay? And that means that you've a normal thyroid function. But the issue is that when it comes to fertility, all of the research suggests that we should be under 2.5. So our TSH should be kind of anywhere from kind of 1 to, or like 0.5 to 2.5. So I have had so many clients, like that would be basically optimal thyroid function, but I've had so many clients come to us who either haven't been able to get pregnant, or who've suffered recurring pregnancy loss, or have menstrual dysregularities, and their thyroid, their TSH is 3.8 or 3.5 or 4.1, and they've been told by their GP that their thyroid function is absolutely fine. But when you're trying to conceive, it's a different range. You need to be from 0.5 to 2.5. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't know this. Thankfully, I feel like I do like podcasts, or I'm chatting with a client doing a consultation, and they're like, oh, my TSH is under 2.5. I'm like, I'm obviously drilling it into people, which is good. It's like, I know it's supposed to be under 2.5, which is really good. So hopefully, I think the message is getting out there a little bit. But it's just important to know that optimal range for fertility for TSH is 0.5 to 2.5, and nothing above that.
That one really stood out to me. I was out for
Yeah.
a walk and I listened to that, and I was shocked, because actually one of my clients she's trying to conceive at the moment, and she went and got her test done, and it was literally, I was doing her check-in just after I listened to your podcast, and I sent her your podcast straight away. I was like, just with regards to like blood tests and that, like just have a listen to this. Because the other thing I love that you talk about, and you know what, like it's so self-explanatory, but at the same time I was like, it's another thing women never think of. It takes two to tango. Why is it always the women getting all the tests? Why are the men not getting all these tests as soon as the women come in as well? Like that stuck out to me so much. I was like, yes, she's so right. What?
Yeah, it blows my mind. Like I will have clients, like I offer discovery calls. So for anyone who's thinking about trying like working with us, I always offer like a free discovery call, just kind of have a little chat, like learn a little bit about them, tell them a little bit about what we do, and see if we might be a good fit for each other. And Narissa, I've never had a man ring me and tell me about their fertility struggles. It's always women, and I'll have women and they'll be like, okay, I'm doing everything right. I read these 3 books and I'm managing my blood sugars. I'm taking my XYZ supplements. I'm like moderately exercising, not too much, not too little, not exercising like being chased by a bear. And I like eating all my vegetables. I just like sleep is perfect. Stress is great. Like I don't know what I'm doing wrong. And I'm like, oh, what's your partner doing? And they're like, oh yeah, and don't talk to me about him. Like he won't eat vegetables and like he like drinks like Saturday and Sunday. And I'm like, I think I need to work with him instead of working with you. Do you know what I mean? And it's really sad because women just take this burden on themselves. And when things don't go wrong, even when it comes to pregnancy loss, they just assume that, well, I'm the one with the womb and I'm the one with the uterus. So therefore, if there was a pregnancy loss, it must be because of me. But 50% of the time when it comes to pregnancy loss, it's male factor. And it's like this just isn't known, like this narrative just isn't out there. So it is so important. Like it takes the genetic material that it takes to make an embryo comes from 2 people. Yeah. So why would it just be the woman who is like doing really well with nutrition, exercise, lifestyle, supplementation, and they're in the pub 3 nights a week? Do you know what I mean? So it's really, really important that narrative, like that's something that I'm really passionate as well, is kind of changing that narrative. And because it's hard, like especially if someone is struggling with conceiving. And I feel like women kind of, they take that so hard, especially if you're in the age category where lots of your friends are getting pregnant, or you're going to baby showers, or you're going to a brunch where someone else is announcing that they're pregnant, or, you know, it's really, really difficult. So, and they just kind of tend to bear that burden. So I think it's important to understand that it's 2 people in this partnership or in this relationship. So both of them are responsible.
I think that's huge, because any clients that I've had that have said, oh, we're going for blood tests, like ever since I listened to that, it stood out to me so much. I was like, and is your partner going as well? Like, are they getting all these tests? And they were like, what? And then I'd send them the podcast again. And I'm like, no, but literally it is 50-50 here. I'm like, so why do you feel that like you have to take this all on yourself? And obviously, as soon as they do it, most of their partners are understanding. They're like, oh yeah, okay, I'll go and do it. Like, but at the same time, I think it's and I work with a lot of clients who have kids and stuff as well. And something I find at the moment, a lot of clients are feeling very overwhelmed. There's a lot going on. The kids are coming off school. They have work. They have a lot of things going on. And something so simple that I said to one of them a while ago is, I was like, are you just doing everything though? Are you just afraid to, like, why don't you just ask for help? We become so wrapped up in saying yes and putting everyone first and having to do this and having to do that. And like all of a sudden then we're becoming overwhelmed. And I always say to my clients, I'm like, in order for you to show up the best you can in anything you're doing, you have to be taking a little bit of time to fill your own cup. And part of that sometimes is just being able to ask for help. I know I struggle with it a bit and I'm getting better at it. Yeah. Practice what I preach and all that jazz. But like last week it's funny actually, you said earlier, you were saying around that day, your cycle where you can't even get your words out. We were supposed to do this podcast last week. I was in that phase of my cycle. I crashed into a parked car.
Are you telling me that?
Oh, disaster. Like when I say I had a really stressful week anyway, and I took on too much as well. And then I was in that phase of my cycle, crashed into a parked car and was like, oh no.
It's mad. Your coordination is lower in your luteal phase. Yeah.
I should have told the mechanic that yesterday. Yeah.
It's fine. I'm just in my luteal phase, really uncoordinated, really clumsy. But it's so interesting because in terms of like contact sports, it's something to bear in mind is that like kind of any multi-directional sports, you tend to just be a little bit more, again, like it's just a rule of thumb, it might not be for anyone, but you tend to be a little bit more clumsy, and also progesterone, that hormone that's dominant, tends to add to kind of like laxity in your tendons. So you are more susceptible to injure yourself. So.
No, like I'm well known for being a little bit clumsy anyway, but actually not this cycle where I crashed into the car. But last month I was in the gym and I was doing something, and I was like, it was around that time my cycle. I wasn't even going that heavy in the gym. I was doing a bit of a deload week, but I don't know what way I caught my finger in the thing and the whole thing busted in, and my boyfriend was just like, he was just like, what do you be doing? What? I was like, it wasn't doing the exercise. It was actually taking the weight off. I was like, I dropped it. He was like, why are you so
Oh,
clumsy? I'm, it's my luteal phase. Leave me alone. Just clumsy. Absolutely
oh
clumsy.
gosh. Okay.
But I'm just trying to think now. Oh yeah. So what would just going back to the conceiving, because I have a couple of clients that are trying to conceive and some of them are thinking about like what kind of blood tests to go for. What would be the main ones that you'd recommend if someone was having issues with fertility?
So for blood test, I would say day 3 FSH and LH. So they are basically really important hormones for ovarian function. So we just kind of want to see what the function of the ovaries are. It kind of just gives us a ballpark of like where are we at in terms of timing, like are we coming towards the end of our fertility? Because again, not to scare people, like I've seen people who are in their early 30s going into what's called like premature ovarian failure, or premature ovarian insufficiency. So basically what that means is they're going into premature menopause. So your FSH or LH kind of give an indication as to where you're at. They also might be a sign if you have PCOS. The other one might be what's called AMH, anti-Mullerian hormone. And this is kind of like a big scary test for a lot of people because it gives an indication of your ovarian reserve. So how many eggs that you have left. So again, like if I'm working with someone and they've been trying to conceive for quite a while and they're a little bit older, I would like to have their AMH tested. And the reason for that is it just gives us an idea of timeline. Like obviously AMH is not definitively, it's not a complete depiction or a full picture of your fertility, but it would be unethical for me to say to someone, yeah, like let's just give it like 9 months, like let's just try and get pregnant naturally for 9 months and maybe then think about IVF. So if I had someone who had elevated FSH and low AMH like in combination with each other, that is kind of just like not a warning sign, but it just gives us an idea that we're running out of time a little bit. So in that sense, I'd be like, okay, let's optimize things. 3 months we'll do like an egg and sperm kind of supercharged protocol. Basically we'll put your eggs and sperm into boot camp, and then if nothing has happened, then I would suggest going for like fertility treatment or looking kind of into the more medical approach. And what's important to understand is like two of those things can work synergistically. I think sometimes we think like, okay, I'm going to try and get pregnant naturally and do everything that I can naturally, or I'm going to go down the medicine route. It's like, no, if you actually combine the two, that's normally, especially obviously there are some people that won't actually need fertility treatment, but for people who do, if you combine them, they work really well together. So that's FSH, LH, your AMH, again, your TSH, and which is your thyroid stimulating hormone, and also your thyroxine, your free T4. Those would be the main ones, because you just, again, we want to have a look at thyroid health. And if you did suspect that you have elevated androgens, getting your testosterone, your DHEAS, your sex hormone binding globulin done, just to make sure that we're not in kind of PCOS territory. And then vitamin D, folic acid, or folate, and your iron and your B12. Those would be the main ones. Obviously, like again, it depends on the person, but for the most part, those would be the ones to have a look at. And also prolactin as well. Make sure that's in check.
I found this so interesting when I was reading your book. Like I was literally going through all the blood tests, and I was like, "This is amazing." Is the blood? Can you buy it off your website? Yeah, for anyone
Yeah,
who's listening to
yeah.
this and wants. Okay, because I was going to say it's absolutely
Yeah, I think it's
brilliant.
only like €9. So I just put it up there for
It's
cheap.
well worth it though, because I like when I'm listening to something, okay, I have to write it down or whatever. But I was like, I love just having things there and having the numbers in front of me. I'm so old school with it. I'm like, love a good book that I
Yeah,
can
yeah.
see.
No,
But
it's
no,
really handy to have. It's great.
it's kind of well, this is like on the flip side of things. I keep bouncing between the two because to be honest, like I have some clients that are still learning that, like the pill and stuff like that is you're not ovulating on it. And I have other clients who are trying to have babies. So I'm trying to like match the two. Out of curiosity, so like if people wanted to go the non-hormonal route with contraception, are the only two options the copper coil and condoms? Are they kind of the only two options or
So no, so the main ones would be the copper coil would be non-hormonal, but then at the same time I think that the copper coil is put on a bit of a pedestal because it's non-hormonal, but it doesn't come without side effects. Like I've noticed over the course of years, it's a real 50-50 thing. So 50% of people will do really well on the copper coil. 50% of people will have like really severe bleeding, really heavy bleeding, just mid-cycle spotting and bleeding, pain. Some of them had a really tough time with the copper coil. Also, what you're at risk of is like creating like a copper imbalance. So like your body is really, really high in copper. So that kind of comes with its own issues. So it's important to not kind of I've just seen it put on a pedestal before. And I'm like, I've seen so many clients, like a lot of clients who come through our doors who've been on copper coil, and it's been a real 50-50 mix. Obviously condoms. And then the other one would be our fertility tracking, essentially. So our fertility awareness method, FAM. And basically what this is doing is using biofeedback from our body, usually our basal body temperature, as you said, natural cycles, to determine exactly when we're ovulating. And then that gives us an idea as to when our red days, if you're obviously not trying to get pregnant or trying not to avoid pregnancy, a red day is when you are fertile and should avoid having sex or unprotected sex. And then your green day, if you're trying to avoid pregnancy, is your day that you're much less likely to get pregnant. So your FAM I would be a big fan of them. Like I've used it for years. I wouldn't have tracked like BBT. It would be more so like I'd go off of like change in cervical fluid, and then I'd know, okay, this is a time to not have unprotected sex. So those would be the main ones. Obviously, like again, every single contraception is going to come with its drawbacks. FAM being that you have to be really patient with it. You have to really, really know your body quite well. If you do use something like Natural Cycles, it does actually work with people who don't have a regular cycle, which is great, but it takes a long time for the algorithm to work out, okay, what are your red days and what are your green days? So what I find with clients is when they start off with it, all of their days are red and they're like, I can't have sex. Well, like obviously you can if you want to have protected sex, like barrier method intercourse, but for anyone who was in a relationship who doesn't like using barrier method, then it's kind of tough. You don't get a lot of those like green means go days. So you do have to be patient with it. That would be the main caveat.
I'm actually really glad I spoke to you now, because I am supposed to be getting the copper coil in, and you know what? I nearly feel like it's a sign from the universe. The week I was supposed to get it in, the doctor, like, this is awful, like, but the doctor that was supposed to put it in ended up getting into a crash or something, so they cancelled all their appointments, and then they tried to book me in again, and I'm actually going away on holidays next week, so I was like, I'm not around. So then it got pushed back again, and now the longer I'm thinking about it, and I was like, I'm going to actually slip this in somewhere now.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the main thing is, like, for anyone who's listening who is in the copper coil, it's really important to take what's called zinc picolinate. You can take zinc citrate, but picolinate would be like a more bioavailable form of the supplement. And basically, if you imagine like copper and zinc like are antagonists of each other, so when one goes up, the other goes down. So when you have the copper coil, you're more at risk of a zinc deficiency, but when you bring back up your zinc through your supplement, your copper levels can kind of stabilize a little bit better. So it just means that the symptoms are much better alleviated. So if you do decide to get it done, or to have it in, I would just make sure that you're on top of your zinc.
Yeah, because I think, like, for me, when I came off the pill and stuff a good few years ago, and just started getting really into like tracking my cycle and working with it and not against it, and then actually I went back on the pill anyway for like, I think it was just like 5 weeks or 6 weeks or something, to be like, oh, I'll just go back on it, because I wanted to go back onto something. And oh my God, because I'd been off it for so long, I was so sensitive to knowing the difference of how I felt, and I felt awful. And like, I have a good few clients who've just been on the pill, and I don't tell anyone what to do. I'm like, you know what I mean? Like, I was like, this is not my area of expertise. All I can ever do is talk about my own experience with contraception and stuff like that. I had the bar in when I was 18. That was awful. I hated that. Like, so I just was like, I think it's mad when I actually came off and just had my natural cycle, and that's why I was kind of like, oh, I was really, really enjoying that. Then when I went back on the pill, I realized, I was like, oh, it's the synthetic hormones just don't bode well with me at all. Like,
and I think, you know, how well you can feel without them, then going back on them is really, really tough. Like I I think a lot of us went on them when we were like that bit younger, probably coming towards the end of school. So, and our hormones probably already raging anyway. So we didn't really notice. But when you've gone through a phase where you've become more in tune with your cycle, everything's in sync, you like, you know, when you feel good, you know, when you feel not so good, and then you throw something like your synthetic hormones in, then that can really, like, you can feel really, really significantly different.
Yeah. I think what I missed the most was like, it's not so much that the latter half of the cycle was anywhere like PMS or anything kind of like that, but I love that like follicular phase. I feel like a superhero. Like
I
I am
know.
bouncing around. I mean, like I'm just enjoying everything I'm doing. I'm just vibing. I was like, life's great, training's great. I was like, everything is just so manageable. And yeah, okay, the latter half of the cycle is a little bit more up, but this just dulled it. Like for me, it just dulled it. I like was like, whoa, I have no motivation to do it. And I'd be quite high energy. Like I love that, like bounce off the walls, love chatting to people, love all of this. And I was just like, I don't want to do anything. Like it was taking
Yeah.
me like 20 minutes to motivate myself to do a little bit of work. And I was like, no, I don't like this. Like I feel like I'm just dulling myself is the only way
Yeah.
I could
Yeah.
describe it. Like it was really strange. Because I think the other thing people don't realize is they're like, oh, they talk about their periods, but like I always ask them in their check-in forms, like, are you on contraception, day your cycle, blah blah blah. And like when they first come to me, they're like, they talk about their period, and I'm like, but you're on the pill, and I was like, they'd be on
Yeah.
like the combined pill, and all. And I was like, you know, that's not a period, and some people are like, what? But it is, and I'm like, but it's not a period because you're not like. People are still
Yeah.
shocked about this, and up until I'd say 3 4 years ago, like I didn't notice either. I was like, whoa, so it's not a period. And they're like,
Yeah, like you're shedding the lining of your uterus, but the only reason you're doing that is because it's you're withdrawing yourself from the synthetic hormones in that 7-day pill break, but it's not actually a true period because it's not after ovulation, because obviously you don't ovulate on the pill. No, I don't mean obviously, because obviously a lot of people don't know that, but you don't ovulate on the pill.
yeah. And I think for me, I was like, oh, which actually, do you know what? I could talk to you all day, but I swear to, I was like, I better let poor Michelle go. My last question is, actually talking about ovulation and stuff like that. How do people usually know when they're ovulating, like with regards to like cervical mucus, things like this? I always think this is another really, really empowering thing as well, that I was like,
Yeah.
wow, okay.
Yeah, so there's a couple of ways of knowing that you're ovulating. Some of the most accurate ones would be BBT, or basal body temperature tracking. So that would be using something like Natural Cycles, in which you take your temperature first thing in the morning every morning. And what will happen is you'll get a rise in your body temperature after ovulation. And it's funny because you'll actually notice, like once you start to be aware of this, like you'll probably notice that you're really hot, like at nighttime, like stripping off in the bed, a couple of days after ovulation. So the algorithm gets to learn your cycle, and then the kind of dips and increases in your basal body temperature. So that's actually one of the only ones that can confirm ovulation. A lot of people think like, oh, I got strange cervical mucus, or I got a positive smiley face on an ovulation predictor kit, but that actually doesn't definitively confirm ovulation. The only two things that can confirm ovulation are an increase in basal body temperature, and also an increase in progesterone, which happens, it's a 7-day peak. So 7 days after you suspect that you've ovulated, pop in to get your bloods done. And if your progesterone is over 30, then that will confirm ovulation. So the other way of tracking or signs of ovulation, or understanding when you're in and around your fertile phase, is your change in cervical fluid. So your cervical fluid will go from, obviously you'll have your period, and then there kind of won't be much for a few days normally, and then you'll notice that you get an increase in cervical fluid, but it's almost like a white, like moisturizer, like lotion consistency. And then it starts to change to a clear, like the only way to describe it is like a raw egg white consistency. So you should actually be able to hold it between your thumb and your finger, and it will actually like be a string. I know some people are like, oh my God, this is so yuck, but I'm like, I talk about this every day of the week. So
I know, I'm fascinated. I'm always like, yes, tell me more.
So that would be that would be a sign that you're in your fertile window. And the whole idea of that cervical fluid is that it helps like transport sperm up into your uterus, into your fallopian tubes. So that would be a way. The other way would be a ovulation predictor kit, an OPK. So these are like your urine test strips that GP on. And basically what they're looking for is what's called LH, or luteinizing hormone. So it's looking for a peak or a surge in our LH, and this is going to happen a day or two before ovulation. So LH is when that surges, and when that peaks, it tells our body to ovulate. So if you get that peak, the idea is that you will ovulate kind of 24 to 48 hours after that period, or even kind of 12 to 48 hours after that surge. Those would be the main ones. Obviously, like some people have ovulation pain. It might be in the middle, it might be on one side, maybe depending on which ovary you've ovulated from that month. But yeah, those would be the main signs as to when you're in your fertile window.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think that's really important to know as well, especially for people conceiving, to just be aware of these things. Like it's, I get that, but it's only, as I said, like in the last few years, I'm like, oh, and I'll get a little pain in my side and I'm like, oh yeah, no, I'm ovulating. And then I'll like take my temperature and it goes up and stuff like that. And I'm like, I actually want to go back to using natural cycles because I miss it. I think I just stopped because I lost my thermometer or something. And I was like, oh no.
Yeah. And there are caveats with it. Like if you, as far as I can remember, if you have slept for 2 hours less than what you normally sleep, or you've gotten 2 hours less than normal sleep in that particular night, then your temperature isn't going to be as accurate. Yeah. Or if you are sick, obviously your temperature will probably be increased. It's not necessarily ovulation. And I don't find that it works great with people who travel, because they'll be up early in the morning to catch a red eye, or up late waiting for flights and stuff like that, or changing kind of time zone. So it's not ideal for people who are traveling with work.
It also always asks you, are you hungover as well? I remember that.
Oh yeah, hungover as well.
It's mad though when you actually start doing this, and then like you get really into nutrition and stuff. And I was doing my temperature and it was warmer. I was like, oh, your body's probably trying to process. I was like, this is mad. Yeah, my friends here she is measuring her temperature in the kitchen after a night of drinking wine. I'm like, just want to see what my temperature is today. Oh, but Michelle, thank you so much. Honestly, I could talk to you all day. I was like, I had to really narrow them questions down. I was like, okay, no, you'll end up having her on for like 3 hours. Do you want to just tell people where they can find you on Instagram, your website, or anything if they want to find out more information?
Yes, so we are the Fit Clinic on Instagram, and thefitclinic.ie is our website.
Amazing. Thank you so much for coming on. I was so excited for this.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It was great.
No matter. Thank you. Wow, that was like an incredible episode. I got so much from that. I really hope you did too. As I said, I really appreciate that if you liked this episode and you found it helpful, please feel free to share it with your friends and family, share it on social media, maybe give it a like, subscribe. You can give it a rating on Spotify. It really goes such a long way in helping me spread a very important message. And it can be quite hard to get the message out when you're a small content creator like myself. So every share means so much to me. I really hope you enjoyed this episode, and I will be back soon with episode 8. And thank you for listening. Have a lovely day.